Okay, we are recording for story 28 out of Grimm's Fairy Tales, Clever Gretel, which, luckily, is not like Clever Hans and Clever Elise, in that Gretel is not stupid. She's a thief, technically, I mean, definitely dishonest, but is not actually an idiot. So she... Actually, yeah, that is a little weird. Hang on. So It describes how she has... Well, she's a cook, this is important, who wore shoes with red rosettes, and when she walked out with them on, she turned herself this way and that and thought, "You certainly are a pretty girl." This doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything, unless there is symbols here that I'm just not getting. Anyhow, she's a cook. And she also, as that paragraph goes on to describe, and this is the opening paragraph, that when she gets home, she will take a draught of wine, which puts her in the mood to eat. Gives her good appetite, so she goes and eat. So her master says, "Gretel, I'm gonna have a guest over, so I want you to make 2 chickens." It later identifies them, but fowl. 2 fowl. And I don't quite remember how he put it, but basically, make them very well. Do a good job with them, I should say. Not very daintily. That's how he described it. So she goes through that and prepares it, and has them sitting by the fire now at the rotisserie, so to turn and baste a little bit, things like that. But the problem is that if they stay near the fire too long, they will overcook, they will dry out, all that. So there is kind of a window of time when you're supposed to eat them. And the guest hasn't arrived yet. So she kind of presses that on the master, and he's like, I'm going to go out and look. See if I can find him. So now she's left alone. And eventually, as time is passing, she does what she can, take care of the birds. But she also decides, I'm going to go into the cellar and get a drink. A lot to drink. So now she comes up. Is in a mood to eat. Possibly also she is drunk. Don't know. It's hard to say because the wine would have had some amount of alcohol. It wouldn't necessarily have had much. It may not have had as much alcohol as we see in modern wine. Because I've mentioned before, wine would have been cleaner. Although I'm pretty sure that is true, but it might be exaggerated. Like that, it might be partially a myth that people would always drink beer and wine and such in different spirits because they were clean. I can believe that was not uncommon, but I could also believe that if somebody said, "Nah, that's largely a myth." Well, the idea that they were going around soused, that's absolutely a myth. No, they were drinking this, would have been very low alcohol content. It would have been more so just flavored water and clean. So anyway, but she comes up and eventually she gives in to the temptations like, well, the wing is burning, so I'll just cut that off and eat it. It's going to look weird if this chicken only has 1 wing on there, so to prevent my master from realizing, I'm going to cut off the other one. More time passes. She gets more to drink. She just ends up eating one of the chickens, and actually gets to work on the other before he comes back. And the master comes back and is like, okay, he's coming, get things ready. So he starts, go make sure the tables are ready, and then takes a knife and starts sharpening that on the steps, which I find, I'm a little curious about that. Was it actually a thing that you would just, if you had stone steps, that you would sharpen a knife on that? I can believe it. I can understand that. By the way, it sounds like we're getting some rain, so in case that comes through, or if the light suddenly turns off. Anyway, so her goose cooked, you might say, but she has it actually isn't clear she has a plan per se. But when the guest arrives, because the master is just like, oh, he's on his way, he'll be here shortly. So she goes and meets him, and says, you'd best run. My master. No, this page. Yeah. He certainly did ask you to supper, but his intention is to cut off your 2 ears. Just listen how he is sharpening the knife for it. And indeed, he can't hear this, so he's like, runs away. And then she goes and tells the master that he ran off and is a thief, that he stole the 2 chickens. So now the master's like, could have left me just 1. So he chases after the guy with the knife, yelling out, just one, just one. So he's thinking, oh, you want just 1 ear? No, I'm still. So it's like, yes. she is actually kind of clever here. But she is, as I said, certainly dishonest. You might also describe her as a thief. She did eat something that was not her property. She should not have eaten that. She knew she should not have eaten that, but she did it anyway. So I think I chalk this up more so to being just a story. But there is also a moral to it as far as this is wrong to do, kids. I'm telling you this story because, yes, it is entertaining, but don't do this. This is wrong. So kind of all I got. I mean, I do kind of like it. It is kind of funny, but it is just... I do kind of wish we had a little bit more there. That, I mean, it's... I don't know. More to make it clear you don't do this, but it's as I said, it's probably just meant to be an entertaining and amusing story, so... That's fine. That's fine. And those certainly have their uses. Oh my god, they certainly do. Things can just be entertaining. Even fairy tales. Even fairy tales. Although, that does actually make me wonder now about the compilation of it, because some of these stories were potentially, well, many of them were likely on decades, some of them potentially for centuries before the Brothers Grimm collected them together. I wonder how long this one may have been. Because I would expect that those that have a moral value to them to potentially survive longer, because it is a, yes, I want to pass this on because there's certain truths here to share. Whereas this seems more entertaining, which is still truth and entertainment. But I can believe it might not be as long. Might not have been around as long. Don't know. And honestly, if I'm completely wrong on my guessing there, that's fine. I'm just... It is an interesting thing to think about. And it's also a yes, that's what my expectation is. That those with the moral value to them would be of greater value and would last longer. But at the same time, that could be completely wrong. It could just be, nah, it's a good story, so we'll remember it and pass it on. That can happen too. That can happen too. I'm just trying to think, are there any... I don't know. Beowulf, maybe? Because there's a weird thing, and I need to find out more about this. But one thing that I'd seen was that for a long time, because that is the oldest existing English story, and it is in Old English, but it's the oldest one. There may have been other stories, but none have survived through history. But Beowulf, for a long time, was just treated as it's just a story. But Tolkien, as a professor, did an analysis of it that I'm trying to remember what I've seen talked about, but I'd really like to see more on what his actual lecture was. But basically, he argued that there's symbolism in it that is both Norse and Christian, that you see a merging of the two there. Because that is, in many places, how Christianity actually could come to dominance in some ways, where it would start to lay claim to the pagan things that had existed. But some people then take that, oh, well, it has pagan origins. No, that's not how it is. It comes in there so that there are things that are recognizable to the people, and then they start potentially morphing the story a little bit, so that it comes more into what the Christian faith is, whichever the specific version of the faith is, because there are different versions, depending on the time period. But you bring that over, and then ultimately you may then just treat it as, well, yes, it is just a story, but you are still learning from it. There are now Christian symbols in there that would be recognized, but ultimately would still serve the Christian faith, because that is also one thing about it. And Tolkien very much was a believer of that. That basic... How did I once see it put? I actually have like a theology of Tolkien book. I may try rereading that at some point, because when you don't have his letters and such to reference next to you, it's a hard book to read. But that basically Tolkien, who was very much a devout Catholic, believed that even a pagan story is still of value, even in a completely Christian situation, environment, and such. Was like, you can learn from that. You can have value there, but anything that would be in contradiction with Catholic teachings, the Bible, everything there, it's like, well, then obviously that is wrong. The teachings, the Catholic teachings, such, the Bible, that would be right. It's like, and it is a very interesting view, and there is a specific term for it. I don't quite remember what it is, but that does also mean, though, that going back to the whole moral things, that some of this might actually be there might be some stories out there that don't appear to have a moral, but they actually served as that kind of transitory story then. And that might be a reason for them to survive. I don't know. But anyway, it is still an interesting thought there. One that certainly has not always existed in history, and not with all cultures. The idea that, because many cultures would also have done that with the whole trying to lay claim to another's story, another's culture, to then make it easier to conquer them. And like one thing, I think I mentioned this in a previous video. Greco-Roman mythology, which, yes, in some ways I should not be calling Greco-Roman because there are very much differences. And yeah, this is actually a way to put it. The Romans had their mythology, right? And the Greeks had theirs. The Romans didn't really like, oh yeah, it translates. No. They just I can't say the word. They consumed it, essentially. That there's a different word that's like, that it's not just that like Apollo is the same or Zeus is Jupiter. No. It's not quite that. There's actually more nuance to it. It's not 1-to-1 from Greek to Roman. Crap, now I'm kind of losing the thought to it. But it's still both like Apollo. There would have been a cult of Apollo in a different part of the world. Greeks encountered it and decided to just incorporate Apollo into their pantheon. And this actually leads to some very curious things, because Dionysus is one where we're actually not... There would have been a cult of Dionysus, but it was also like a cult of another god that might also be Dionysus. And so it's like we're unsure, because then you get stories in Greek mythology that reference them separately, but it's like, well, no, it's actually potentially referencing the same deity, but by a different name, and we don't realize that now. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept and practice that you see there that is quite ancient, and it served purposes that were very useful because of how you are then bringing in, you're assimilating other cultures that way, and not necessarily in a destructive manner. Yeah, it's also... Oh man, I'm trying to think of... Like, one other example, going back to the Nordic stuff, is if you... There are images, there are pictures, because some still exist. Norse churches. Because of when Christianity got there and how the Norse built buildings, you would look at them and they look radically different from the churches you would see in southern Europe, like in Italy, yeah, and around there, more so around the Mediterranean. Just because different materials, different styles, but it's like, well, it didn't matter. You'd still do it that way because you're joining the cultures, essentially, instead of just overwriting one. But yeah, so in that regard, then, it would make sense, as coming back to it, the story just being entertainment, you'd still do that. There'd still be a value to that story. Boy, am I going far afield on this. Sorry, it's just kind of part of how my mind works. But you would still have a value for the stories that are just entertaining, even if they don't have a moral value, because it's part of how you bring the culture in. So yeah. I got nothing. I think it is just I have an aversion to 5-minute long videos. Sorry. But it is also, I do, even if 90% of what I've just laid out as guesswork is wrong, it's still a very interesting topic to me. I'd love to know more. I don't really know how I could learn it. Yeah, but it's a very interesting topic. Many cultures, I think I can, well, I was going to say many cultures do that, where they do just, they have their own stories, yes, but they also have stories that they do assimilate from others. So yeah, the next one, I know, I'm just like, I didn't want to say, it occurred to me I shouldn't say that, but then it's like, well, I thought I should finish it, but it has nothing to do with this. Or a little to do. Yeah, next we have the Bremen Town musicians. Well, I mean, I guess in a way, though, the Brothers Grimm, by collecting the works, the fairy tales together, that is exactly that kind of cultural assimilation. Because they would have obviously translated it into German, where some of it might have been in other languages. So it would translate it into German. So now the German culture assimilates it that way. They can share it. And even if it has symbols that the Germans don't know, It still is there. The stories are being told. And maybe also the Brothers Grimm were changing some things, that they were doing not just translation, but localization, as we would call it today. It's possible. Now I'm actually kind of wondering, because there is the concern that some foreign works are being localized into other cultures, mainly into modern Western culture, where they're just completely changing what's being written, what was written, which is thoroughly and utterly inappropriate. It is wrong. That is not assimilation. There's not cultural assimilation. There's cultural destruction. I mean, straight up, you are destroying the culture that you were supposed to be respecting and bringing in. And yes, you can assimilate respectfully. It is also possible to assimilate disrespectfully, but no, I'm just going to say that if you're badly localizing, you are that is not disrespectful assimilation. That is just cultural destruction. But this potentially could have been an example of that kind of cultural assimilation. I think I should stop talking now. Sorry. Hey, maybe we'll be lucky when Sleeping Beauty, when we get to that one, I'll probably be able to go and just talk about it. We'll see. We'll see. See you next time.